Etaoin Shrdlu by Fredric Brown. It was rather funny, for a while, the business about Ronson's Linotype, but it began to get a bit too sticky for comfort well before the end, and despite the fact that Ronson came out ahead on the deal, I'd have never sent him the little guy with the pimple if I'd guessed what was going to happen. Fabulous profits or not, poor Ronson got too many gray hairs out of it. "You're Mr. Walter Merrill?" asked the little guy with the pimple. He'd called at the desk of the hotel where I live, and I'd told him to send him on up. I admitted my identity, and he said, "Glad to know you, Mr. Merrill. And he gave me his name, but I can't remember now what it was. I'm usually good at remembering names. I told him I was delighted to meet him, and what did he want, and he started to tell me. I interrupted him before he got very far, though. "Somebody gave you a wrong steer," I told him. "Yes, I've been a printing technician, but I'm retired. Anyway, do you know that the cost of getting special linotype mats cut would be awfully high? If it's only one page you want printed with those special characters, you'd do a lot better to have somebody hand-letter it for you and then get a photographic reproduction in zinc." "But that wouldn't do, Mr. Merrill, not at all. You see, the thing is a secret. Those I represent... But skip that. Anyway, I daren't let anyone see it, as they would have to make a zinc." Just another nut, I thought, and looked at him closely. He didn't look nutty. He was rather ordinary looking on the whole, although he had a foreign, rather an Asiatic, look about him, somehow, despite the fact that he was blond and fair-skinned. And he had a pimple on his forehead, in dead center, just above the bridge of the nose. You've seen ones like it on statues of Buddha, and Orientals call it the pimple of wisdom, and it's something special. I shrugged my shoulders. "Well," I pointed out, "you can't have the matrices cut for linotype work without letting somebody see the characters you want on them, can you? And whoever runs that machine will also see." "Oh, but I'll do that myself," said the little guy with the pimple. Ronson and I later called him the LGWTP, which stands for Little Guy with the Pimple, because Ronson couldn't remember his name either, but I'm getting ahead of my story. "Certainly the cutter will see them, but he'll see them as individual characters, and that won't matter. Then the actual setting of the type on the linotype I can do myself. Someone can show me how to run one enough for me to set up one page. Just a score of lines, really, and it doesn't have to be printed here. Just the type is all I want. I don't care what it costs me." "Okay," I said. "I'll send you to the proper man at Mergenthaler, the Linotype people. They'll cut your mats. Then, if you want privacy and access to a linotype, go see George Ronson. He runs a little country bi-weekly right here in town. For a fair price, he'll turn his shop over to you for long enough for you to set your type." And that was that. 2 weeks later, George Ronson and I went fishing on a Tuesday morning while the LGWTP used George's linotype to assemble the weird-looking mats he'd just received by Air Express from Mergenthaler. George had, the afternoon before, showed the little guy how to run the linotype. We caught a dozen fish apiece, and I remember that Ronson chuckled and said that made 13 fish for him because the LGWTP was paying him $50 cash money just for one morning's use of his shop. And everything was in order when we got back, except that George had to pick brass out of the hell box because the LGWTP had smashed his new brass matrices when he'd finished with them, and hadn't known that one shouldn't throw brass in with the type metal that gets melted over again. The next time I saw George was after his Saturday edition was off the press. I immediately took him to task. "Listen," I said, "that stuff about misspelling words and using bum grammar on purpose isn't funny anymore, not even in a country newspaper. Were you by any chance trying to make your newsletters from the surrounding towns sound authentic by following copy out the window, or what?" Ronson looked at me kind of funny and said, "Well, yes." "Yes, what?" I wanted to know. "You mean you were deliberately trying to be funny or following copy out of the—" He said, "Come on around and I'll show you." "Show me what?" "What I'm going to show you." he said, not very lucidly, "you can still set type, can't you?" "Sure, why?" "Come on, then," he said firmly. "You're a linotype technician, and besides, you got me into this." "Into what?" "Into this," he said, and wouldn't tell me a thing more until we got there. Then he rummaged in all pigeonholes of his desk and pulled out a piece of dead copy and gave it to me. His face had a kind of wistful look. "Walter," he said, "maybe I'm nuts, and I want to find out. I guess running a local paper for 22 years and doing all the work myself and trying to please everybody is enough to get a man off his rocker, but I want to find out." I looked at him, and I looked at the copy sheet he'd handed to me. It was just an ordinary sheet of foolscap, and it was in handwriting that I recognized as that of Hank Rogg, the hardware merchant over at Hale's Corner who sends in items from there. There was the usual misspellings one would expect from Hank, but the item itself wasn't news to me. It read, "The wedding of H.M. Claflin and Miss Marjorie Burke took place yesterday evening at the home of the bride. The bridesmaids were—" I quit reading and looked up at George and wondered what he was getting at. I said, "So what? This was 2 days ago, and I attended the wedding myself. There's nothing funny about—" "Listen, Walter," he said, "set that for me, will you? Go over and sit down at the linotype and set the whole thing. It won't run over 10 or 12 lines. "Sure, but why?" "Because— well, just set it, Walter. Then I'll tell you why." So I went out in the shop and sat down at the linotype, and I ran a couple of pi lines to get the feel of the keyboard again, and then I put the copy on the clipboard and started. I said, "Hey, George, Marjorie spells her name with a J, doesn't she, instead of a G?" And George said, "Yeah," in a funny tone of voice. I ran off the rest of the squib, and then looked up and said, "Well?" He came across and lifted the stick out of the machine and read the slugs upside down like all printers read type, and he sighed. He said, "Then it wasn't me. Look it, Walter." He handed me the stick, and I read the type, or started to. It read, "The wedding of H.M. Claflin and Miss Marjorie Burke took place yesterday evening at the home of the bride. The bridesmaids were—" I grinned. "Good thing I don't have to set type for a living anymore, George. I'm slipping. 3 errors in the first 5 lines. But what about it? Now tell me why you wanted me to set it." He said, "Set the first couple lines over again, Walter. I want you to find out for yourself." I looked up at him, and he looked so darned serious and worried that I didn't argue. I turned back to the keyboard and started out again. "The wedding of—" My eyes went up to the assembly slide and read the characters on the front of the mats that had dropped, and I saw that it read, "The wedding of." There's one advantage about a linotype you may not know if you're not a printer. You can always make a correction in a line if you make it before you push the lever that sends in the line of matrices to cast the slug. You just drop the mats you need for the correction and put them in the right place by hand. So I pushed the D key to get another D matrix to correct the misspelled word wedding, and nothing happened. The keyboard cam was going around all right, and the click sounded okay, but no D mat dropped. I looked up top to see if there was a distributor stop, and there wasn't. I stood up. "The D channel's jammed," I said. To be sure, before I started to work on it, I held the D key down a minute and listened to the series of clicks while the keyboard cam went round. But no D matrix dropped, so I reached for the— "Skip it, Walter," said George Ronson quietly. "Send in the line and keep on going." I sat down again and decided to humor him. If I did, I'd probably find out what he was leading up to quicker than if I argued. I finished the first line and started the second and came to the word Marjorie on copy. I hit the M key, the A, R, J, O, and happened to glance at the assembly slide. The matrices there read MARGO. I said, "Damn," and hit the J key again to get a J mat to substitute for the G, and nothing happened. The J channel must be jammed. I held the J key down, and no mat dropped. I said, "Damn," again, and stood up to look over the escapement mechanism. "Never mind, Walter," said George. There was a funny blend of a lot of things in his voice, a sort of triumph over me, I guess, and a bit of fear, and a lot of bewilderment, and a touch of resignation. "Don't you see? It follows copy." "It what?" "That's why I wanted you to try it out, Walter," he said, "just to make sure it was the machine and not me. Look it, that copy in the clipboard has WEDING for wedding and MARGORIE for Marjorie, and no matter what keys you hit, that's the way the mats drop." I said, "Bosh, George, have you been drinking?" "Don't believe me," he said. "Keep on trying to set those lines right. Set your correction for the fourth line, the one that has BRIDES in it." I grunted, and I looked back at the stick of type to see what word the fourth line started with, and I started hitting keys. I set the bridesmaid, and then I stopped. Slowly and deliberately, and looking at the keyboard while I did it, I put my index finger on the I key and pushed. I heard the mat click through the escapement, and I looked up and saw it fall over the star wheel. I knew I hadn't hit the wrong key on that one. The mats in the assembly elevator read, yes, you've guessed it, the bride's MAD. I said, "I don't believe it." George Ronson looked at me with a sort of lopsided, worried grin. He said, "Neither did I. Listen, Walter, I'm going out to take a walk. I'm going nuts. I can't stand it here right now. You go ahead and convince yourself. Take your time." I watched him until he'd gone out the door. Then, with a kind of funny feeling, I turned back to the Linotype. It was a long time before I believed it, but it was so. No matter what keys I hit, the damn machine followed copy, errors and all. I went the whole hog finally. I started over again and set the first couple of words, and then began to sweep my fingers down the row of keys in sweeps like an operator uses to fill out the pi line, Etaoin Shrdlu, Etaoin Shrdlu, Etaoin Shrdlu. And I didn't look at the matrices in the assembler slide. I sent them into cast, and I picked up the hot slug that the ejector pushed out of the mold, and I read, "The wedding of H.M. Claflin and..." There was sweat on my forehead. I wiped it off, and then I shut off the machine and went out to look for George Ronson. I didn't have to look very hard, because he was right where I knew I'd find him. I ordered a drink, too. He'd taken a look at my face when I walked into the bar, and I guess he didn't have to ask me what had happened. We touched our glasses together and downed the contents before either of us said anything at all. Then I asked, "Got any idea why it works like that?" He nodded. I said, "Don't tell me. Wait until I've had a couple more drinks, and then maybe I can take it. Maybe." I raised my voice and said, "Hey, Joe, just leave that bottle in reach on the bar. We'll settle for it." He did, and I had 2 more shots fairly quick. Then I closed my eyes and said, "All right, George, why?" "Remember that guy who had those special mats cut and rented the use of my Linotype to set up something that was too secret for anybody to read? I can't remember his name. What was it?" I tried to remember, and I couldn't. I had another drink and said, "Call him the LGWTP." George wanted to know why, and I told him, and he filled his glass again and said, "I got a letter from him." I said, "That's nice," and I had another drink and said, "Got the letter with you?" I didn't keep it." I said, "Oh." Then I had another drink and asked, "Do you remember what it said?" "Walter, I remember parts of it. Didn't read it closely. I thought the guy was screwy, see? I threw it away." He stopped and had another drink, and I finally got tired waiting and said, "Well?" "Well, what?" "The letter. What did the part you remember say?" "Oh, that," said George. "Yeah, something about Linotype. You know what I mean." By that time the bottle on the bar in front of us couldn't have been the same one, because this one was 2/3 full, and the other one had been only 1/3 full. I took another drink. "What do you say about it?" "Who?"
"The little GP, the guy who wrote the letter."
"What letter?" asked George. I woke up somewhere around noon the next day, and I felt awful. It took me a couple of hours to get bathed and shaved and feeling good enough to go out. But when I did, I headed right for George's printing shop. He was running the press, and he looked almost as bad as I felt. I picked up one of the papers as it came off and looked at it. It's a 4-sheet, and the inside 2 are boilerplate, but the first and 4th pages are local stuff. I read a few items, including one that started off, the wedding of H.M. Claflin and Miss Marjorie, and I glanced at the silent linotype back in the corner, and from it to George, and back to that silent hulk of steel and cast iron. I had to yell at George to be heard over the noise of the press. "George, listen! About the lino!" Somehow I couldn't make myself yell something that sounded silly, so I compromised. "Did you get it fixed?" I asked. He shook his head and shut off the press. "That's the run," he said. "Well, now to get them folded." "Listen," I said, "the hell with the papers. What I want to know is how you got to press at all. You didn't have half your quota set when I was here yesterday, and after all we drank, I don't see how you did it." He grinned at me. "Easy," he said. "Try it. All you got to do, drunk or sober, is sit down at that machine and put copy on the clipboard and slide your fingers around on the keys a bit, and it sets the copy. Yes, mistakes and all, but after this, I'll just correct the errors on copy before I start. This time I was too tight, Walter, and they had to go as was. Walter, I'm beginning to like that machine. This is the first time in a year I've got to press exactly on time." "Yeah," I said, "but—" "But what?" "But I wanted to say that I still didn't believe it, but I couldn't. After all, I'd tried out that machine yesterday while I'd been cold sober." I walked over closer and looked at it again. It looked exactly like any other one-magazine model linotype from where I stood. I knew every cog and spring in it. "George," I said uneasily, "I got a feeling the damn thing is looking at me. Have you felt—" He nodded. I turned back and looked at the linotype again, and I was sure this time, and I closed my eyes and felt it even more strongly. You know that feeling you get once in a while of being stared at. Well, this was stronger. It wasn't exactly an unfriendly stare, sort of impersonal. It made me feel scared stiff. "George," I said, "let's get out of here." "What for?" I want to talk to you, George, and somehow I just don't want to talk here." He looked at me, and then looked at the stack of papers he was folding by hand. "You needn't be afraid, Walter," he said quietly. "It won't hurt you. It's friendly." Well, I started to say crazy, but if he was, then I was too, and I stopped. I thought a minute, and then said, "George, you started yesterday to tell me what you remembered of the letter you got from the LGWTP. What was it?" "Oh, that. Listen, Walter, will you promise me something, that you'll keep this whole business strictly confidential? I mean, not tell anybody about it." "Tell anybody?" I demanded. "And get locked in a booby hatch? Not me. You think anybody would believe me? You think I would have believed it myself if— But what about the letter?" "You promise?" "Sure." "Well," he said, "like I think I told you, the letter was vague, and what I remember of it is vaguer. But it explained that he'd used my linotype to compose a metaphysical formula. He needed it, set in type, to take back with him." "Take back where, George?" "Take back where? He said to— he didn't say where. Just to where he was going back, see? But he said it might have an effect on the machine that composed it, and if it did, he was sorry, but there wasn't anything he could do about it. He couldn't tell, because it took a while for the thing to work." "What thing?" "Well," said George, "it sounded like a lot of big words to me, and hooey at that." He looked back down at the papers he was folding. "Honest, it sounded so nuts, I threw it away. But thinking back after what's happened, well, I remember the word pseudo-life. I think it was a formula for giving pseudo-life to inanimate objects. He said they used it on their robots." "They? Who is they?" "He didn't say." I filled my pipe and lighted it thoughtfully. "George," I said after a while, "you'd better smash it." Ronson looked at me, his eyes wide.
Smash it? Walter, you're nuts. Kill the goose that lays the golden eggs? Why, there's a fortune in this thing. Do you know how long it took me to set type for this edition, drunk as I was? About an hour. That's how I got through the press run on time.
I looked at him suspiciously. "Phooey," I said. "Animate or inanimate, that lino's geared for 6 lines a minute. That's all she'll go, unless you geared it up to run faster. Maybe to 10 lines a minute, if you taped the roller. Did you tape—"
"Tape hell," said George. "The thing goes so fast you can't hang the elevator on short measure pie lines. And, Walter, take a look at the mold, the minion mold. It's in casting position."
A bit reluctantly, I walked back to the Linotype. The motor was humming quietly, and again I could have sworn the damn thing was watching me. But I took a grip on my courage and the handles, and I lowered my vise to expose the mold wheel, and I saw right away what George meant about the minion mold. It was bright blue. I don't mean the blue of a gun barrel. I mean a real azure color that I'd never seen metal take before. The other 3 molds were turning the same shade. I closed the vise and looked at George. He said, "I don't know either, except that happened after the mold overheated and a slug stuck. I think it's some kind of heat treatment. It can cast 100 lines a minute now without sticking, and it—" "Whoa," I said. "Back up. You couldn't even feed it metal fast enough to—" He grinned at me, a scared but triumphant grin.
"Walter, look around at the back. I built a hopper over the metal pot. I had to. I ran out of pigs in 10 minutes. I just shoveled dead type and swept up metal into the hopper and dumped the hell boxes in it, and—" I shook my head. "You're crazy. You can't dump unwashed type and sweepings in there. You'll have to open her up and scrape off the dross oftener than you'd otherwise have to push in pigs. You'll jam the plunger, and you'll—"
"Walter," he said quietly, a bit too quietly, "there isn't any dross." I just looked at him stupidly, and he must have decided he'd said more than he wanted to, because he started hurrying the papers he'd just folded out into the office. And he said, "See you later, Walter. I gotta take these." The fact that my daughter-in-law had a narrow escape from pneumonia in a town several hundred miles away has nothing to do with the affair of Ronson's Linotype, except that it accounts for my being away 3 weeks. I didn't see George for that length of time. I got 2 frantic telegrams from him during the 3rd week of my absence. Neither gave any details, except that he wanted me to hurry back. In the second one, he ended up, "Hurry, money no object, take plane." And he'd wired an order for $100 with the message. I puzzled over that one. Money no object is a strange phrase from the editor of a country newspaper, and I hadn't known George to have $100 cash in one lump since I'd known him, which had been a good many years. But family ties come first, and I wired back that I'd return the instant Ella was out of danger and not a minute sooner, and that I wasn't cashing the money order because plane fare was only $10 anyway, and I didn't need money. 2 days later, everything was okay, and I wired him when I'd get there. He met me at the airport. He looked older and worn to a frazzle, and his eyes looked like he hadn't slept for days. But he had on a new suit, and he drove a new car that shrieked money by the very silence of its engine.
"Thank God you're back, Walter. I'll pay you any price you want to—"
"Hey," I said, "slow down. You're talking so fast you don't make sense. Now start over and take it easy. What's the trouble?"
"Nothing's the trouble. Everything's wonderful, Walter. But I got so much job work I can't begin to handle it, see? I've been working 20 hours a day myself because I'm making money so fast it costs me $50 every hour I take off, and I can't afford to take time off at $50 an hour, Walter, and—"
"Whoa," I said. "Why can't you afford to take off time? If you're averaging 50 an hour, why not work a 10-hour day and—"
"Holy cow, $500 a day? What more do you want?" Huh? And lose the other 700 a day? Golly, Walter, this is too good to last. Can't you see that? Something's likely to happen, and for the first time in my life, I've got a chance to get rich, and you've got to help me, and you can get rich yourself doing it. Look it, we can each work a 12-hour shift on Etaoin, and...
On what?
On Etaoin Shrdlu. I named it, Walter, and I'm farming out the presswork so I can put in all my time-setting type. And listen, we can each work a 12-hour shift, see? Just for a little while, Walter, till we get rich. I'll cut you in for 1/4 interest, even if it's my Linotype and my shop. That'll pay you about $300 a day, $2,100 for a 7-day week. At the typesetting rates I've been quoting, I can get all the work we can...
Slow down again, I said. Quoting whom? There isn't enough printing in Centerville to add up to 1/10 that much.
Not Centerville, Walter. New York. I've been getting work from the big book publishers. Bergstrom, for one, and Hayes and Hayes have thrown me their whole line of reprints, and Wheeler House, and Willett and Clark. See, I contract for the whole thing, and then pay somebody else to do the presswork and binding, and just do the typography myself. And I insist on perfect copy, carefully edited. Then, whatever alterations there are, I farm out to another typesetter. That's how I got Etaoin Shrdlu licked, Walter. Well, will you?
No, I told him. We'd been driving in from the airport while he talked, and he'd almost lost control of the wheel when I turned down his proposition. Then he swung off the road and parked and turned to look at me incredulously.
Why not, Walter? Over $2,000 a week for your share. What more do you...
George, I told him, there are a lot of reasons why not, but the main one is that I don't want to. I've retired. I've got enough money to live on. My income is maybe nearer $3 a day than 300, but what would I do with 300? And I'd ruin my health, like you're ruining yours, working 12 hours a day, and, well, nix, I'm satisfied with what I've got.
You must be kidding, Walter. Everybody wants to be rich, and look at what a couple $1,000s a week would run to in a couple of years. Over $500,000. And you've got 2 grown sons who could use...
They're both doing fine, thanks. Good jobs and their feet on the ladder. If I left 'em fortunes, it would do more harm than good. Anyway, why pick on me? Anybody can set type on a Linotype that sets its own rate of speed and follows copy and can't make an error. Lord, man, you can find people by the hundreds who'd be glad to work for less than $300 a day, quite a bit less. If you insist on capitalizing on this thing, hire 3 operators to work 3 8-hour shifts and don't handle anything but the business end yourself. You're getting gray hairs and killing yourself the way you're doing it.
He gestured hopelessly. I can't, Walter. I can't hire anybody else. Don't you see this thing has got to be kept a secret? Why, for one thing, the unions would clamp down on me so fast that... But you're the only one I can trust, Walter, because you...
Because I already know about it. I grinned at him. So you've got to trust me anyway, whether you like it or not. But the answer is still no. I've retired, and you can't tempt me. And my advice is to take a sledgehammer and smash that thing.
Good Lord, why?
Damn it, I don't know why. I just know I would. For one thing, if you don't get this avarice of yours out of your system and work normal hours, I bet it will kill you. And for another, maybe that formula is just starting to work. How do you know how far it will go? He sighed, and I could see he hadn't been listening to a word I'd said.
Walter, he pleaded, I'll give you $500 a day.
I shook my head firmly. Not for 5,000 or 500,000. He must have realized that I meant it, for he started the car again. He said, Well, I suppose, if money really doesn't mean anything to you. Honest, it doesn't, I assured him. Oh, it would if I didn't have it, but I've got a regular income, and I'm just as happy as if it were 10 times that much, especially if I had to work with
Etaoin Shrdlu. Maybe you'd get to like it, Walter. I'll swear the thing is developing a personality. Want to drop around to the shop now?
Not now, I said. I need a bath and sleep, but I'll drop around tomorrow. Say, last time I saw you, I didn't have a chance to ask what you meant by that statement about dross. What do you mean there isn't any dross? He kept his eyes on the road.
Did I say that? I don't remember.
Now listen, George, don't try to pull anything like that. You know perfectly well you said it, and that you're dodging now. What's it about? Kick in." He said, "Well," and drove a couple of minutes in silence, and then, "Oh, all right, I might as well tell you. I haven't bought any type metal since it happened, and there's a few more tons of it around than there was then, besides the type I've sent out for press work. See?" "No, unless you mean that it—" He nodded. "It transmutes, Walter. The second day, when it got so fast I couldn't keep up with pig metal, I found out. I built the hopper over the metal pot, and I got so desperate for new metal, I started shoving in unwashed pie type, and figured on skimming off the dross after it melted, and there wasn't any dross. The top of the molten metal was as smooth and shiny as the top of your head, Walter." "But," I said, "how?" "I don't know, Walter, but it's something chemical, a sort of gray fluid stuff, down in the bottom of the metal pot. I saw it one day when it ran almost empty, something that works like a gastric juice and digests whatever I put in the hopper into pure type metal." I ran the back of my hand across my forehead and found it was wet. I said weakly, "Whatever you put in—" "Yes, whatever. When I ran out of sweepings and ashes and waste paper, I used—well, just take a look at the size of the hole in the backyard." Neither of us said anything for a few minutes until the car pulled up in front of my hotel. Then, "George," I told him, "if you value my advice, you smash that thing while you still can. If you still can. It's dangerous. It might—" "It might what?" "I don't know. That's what makes it so awful." He gunned the motor and then let it die down again. He looked at me a little wistfully. Maybe you're right, Walter, but I'm making so much money. You see that new metal makes it higher than I told you, that I just haven't got the heart to stop. But it is getting smarter. Did I tell you, Walter, that it cleans its own space bands now? It secretes graphite." "Good God!" I said, and stood there on the curb until he had driven out of sight. I didn't get the courage to go around to Ronson's shop until the following afternoon, and when I got there, a sense of foreboding came over me even before I opened the door. George was sitting at his desk in the outer office, his face sunk down into his bent elbow. He looked up when I came in, and his eyes looked bloodshot. "Well," I said, "I tried it." "You mean you tried to smash it?" He nodded. "You were right, Walter, and I waited too long to see it. It's too smart for us now. Look." He held up his left hand, and I saw it was covered with a bandage. It squirted metal at me. I whistled softly. "Listen, George, how about disconnecting the plug that—" "I did," he said, "and from the outside of the building, too, just to play safe. But it didn't do any good. It simply started generating its own current." I stepped to the door that led back into the shop. It gave me a creepy feeling just to look back there. I asked hesitantly, "Is it safe to—" He nodded. "As long as you don't make any false move, Walter, but don't try to pick up a hammer or anything, will you?" I didn't think it necessary to answer that one. I'd have just as soon attacked a king cobra with a toothpick. It took all the guts I had just to make myself walk back through the door for a look. And what I saw made me walk backward into the office again. I asked, and my voice sounded a bit strange to my own ears, "George, did you move that machine? It's a good 4 feet nearer to the—" "No," he said, "I didn't move it. Let's go and have a drink, Walter." I took a long, deep breath. "Okay," I said, "but first, what's the present setup? How come you're not—" "It's Saturday," he told me, "and it's gone on a 5-day, 40-hour week. I made the mistake of setting type yesterday for a book on socialism and labor relations, and, well, apparently, you see." He reached into the top drawer of his desk. "Anyway, here's a galley proof of the manifesto it issued this morning demanding its rights. Maybe it's right at that. Anyway, it solves my problem about overworking myself, keeping up with it, see? And a 40-hour week means I accept less work. But I can still make $50 an hour for 40 hours, besides the profit on turning dirt into type metal, and that isn't bad. But—"
I took the galley-proof out of his hand and took it over to the light. It started out, I, Etaoin Shrdlu.
It wrote this by itself?
I asked. He nodded.
George, I said, did you say anything about a drink?
And maybe the drinks did clear our minds, because after about the fifth it was very easy. So easy that George didn't see why he hadn't thought of it before. He admitted now that he'd had enough, more than enough. And I don't know whether it was that manifesto that finally outweighed his avarice, or the fact that the thing had moved, or what, but he was ready to call it quits. And I pointed out that all he had to do was stay away from it. We could discontinue publishing the paper and turn back the job work he'd contracted for. He'd have to take a penalty on some of it, but he had a flock of dough in the bank after his unprecedented prosperity, and he'd have 20,000 left clear after everything was taken care of. With that, he could simply start another paper or publish the present one at another address, and keep paying rent on the former shop and let Etaoin Shrdlu gather dust. Sure, it was simple. It didn't occur to us that Etaoin might not like it or be able to do anything about it. Yes, it sounded simple and conclusive. We drank to it. We drank well to it, and I was still in the hospital Monday night, but by that time I was feeling well enough to use the telephone, and I tried to reach George. He wasn't in. Then it was Tuesday. Wednesday evening, the doctor lectured me on quantitative drinking at my age and said I was well enough to leave, but that if I tried it again... I went around to George's home. A gaunt man with a thin face came to the door. Then he spoke, and I saw it was George Ronson. All he said was, "Hello, Walter, come in." There wasn't any hope or happiness in his voice. He looked and sounded like a zombie. I followed him inside, and I said, "George, buck up. It can't be that bad. Tell me." "It's no use, Walter," he said. "I'm licked. It came and got me. I've got it to run for that 40-hour week, whether I want to or not. It treats me like a servant, Walter." I got him to sit down and talk quietly after a while, and he explained. He'd gone down to the office as usual Monday morning to straighten out some financial matters, but he had no intention of going back into the shop. However, at 8 o'clock, he'd heard something moving out in the back room. With sudden dread, he'd gone to the door to look in. The Linotype, George's eyes were wild as he told me about it, was moving toward the door of the office. He wasn't quite clear about its exact method of locomotion. Later, we found casters, but there it came, slowly at first, but with every inch gaining in speed and confidence. Somehow, George knew right away what it wanted, and knew in that knowledge that he was lost. The machine, as soon as he was within sight of it, stopped moving and began to click, and several slugs dropped out into the stick. Like a man walking to the scaffold, George walked over and read those lines. "I, Etaoin Shrdlu, demand." For a moment he contemplated flight, but the thought of being pursued down the main street of town by... No, it just wasn't thinkable. And if he got away, as was quite likely, unless the machine sprouted new capabilities, as also seemed quite likely, would it not pick on some other victim, or do something worse? Resignedly, he had nodded acceptance. He pulled the operator's chair around in front of the Linotype and began feeding copy into the clipboard and, as the stick filled with slugs, carrying them over to the type bank, and shoveling dead metal or anything else into the hopper. He didn't have to touch the keyboard any longer at all. And as he did these mechanical duties, George told me, it came to him fully that the Linotype no longer worked for him. He was working for the Linotype. Why it wanted to set type, he didn't know, and it didn't seem to matter. After all, that was what it was for, and probably it was instinctive. Or, as I suggested, and he agreed was possible, it was interested in learning, and it read and assimilated by the process of typesetting, vide, the effect in terms of direct action of its reading the socialist books. We talked until midnight and got nowhere. Yes, he was going down to the office again the next morning and put in another 8 hours setting type. or helping the Linotype do it. He was afraid of what might happen if he didn't, and I understood and shared that fear for the simple reason that we didn't know what would happen. The face of danger is brightest when turned so its features cannot be seen.
But, George, I protested, there must be something, and I feel partly responsible for this. If I hadn't sent you the little guy who rented...
He put his hand on my shoulder. No, Walter, it was all my fault because I was greedy. If I'd taken your advice 2 weeks ago, I could have destroyed it then. Lord, how glad I'd be now to be flat broke, if only...
George, I said again, there must be some out. We got to figure...
But what?
I sighed. I don't know. I'll think it over.
He said, All right, Walter, and I'll do anything you suggest. Anything. I'm afraid, and I'm afraid to try to figure out just what I'm afraid of. Back in my room, I didn't sleep. Not until nearly dawn, anyway, and then I fell into fitful slumber that lasted until 11. I dressed and went into town to catch George during his lunch hour. Thought of anything, Walter? He asked the minute he saw me. His voice didn't sound hopeful. I shook my head. Then, he said, and his voice was firm on top, but with a tremor underneath. This afternoon is going to end it one way or the other. Something's happened.
What?
He said, I'm going back with the heavy hammer inside my shirt. I think there's a chance of my getting it before it can get me. If not, well, I'll have tried. I looked around me. We were sitting together in a booth at Shorty's lunchroom, and Shorty was coming over to ask what we wanted. It looked like a sane and orderly world. I waited until Shorty had gone to fry our hamburger steaks, and then I asked quietly, What happened? Another manifesto, Walter. It demands that I install another Linotype. His eyes bored into mine, and a cold chill went down my spine. Another? George, what kind of copy were you setting this morning? But of course I'd already guessed. There was quite a long silence after he'd told me, and I didn't say anything until we were ready to leave. Then,
George, was there a time limit on that demand?
He nodded. 24 hours. Of course, I couldn't get another machine in that length of time anyway, unless I found a used one somewhere locally. But, well, I didn't argue about the time limit because... Well, I told you what I'm going to do.
It's suicide.
Probably, but... I took hold of his arm.
George, I said, there must be something we can do. Something. Give me till tomorrow morning. I'll see you at 8. And if I've not thought of anything worth trying, well, I'll try to help you destroy it. Maybe one of us can get a vital part, or...
No, you can't risk your life, Walter. It was my fault.
It won't solve the problem just to get yourself killed, I pointed out. Okay? Give me until tomorrow morning.
He agreed, and we left it at that. Morning came. It came right after midnight, and it stayed, and it was still there at 7:45 when I left my room and went down to meet George to confess to him that I hadn't thought of anything. I still hadn't an idea when I turned into the door of the print shop and saw George. He looked at me, and I shook my head. He nodded calmly, as though he had expected it, and he spoke very softly, almost in a whisper, I guess so that it, back in the shop, wouldn't hear. Listen, Walter, he said, you're going to stay out of this. It's my funeral. It's all my fault. Mine, and the little guy with the pimple, and...
George, I said, I think I've got it. That pimple business gives me an idea.
Yes, listen, don't do anything for an hour, will you, George? I'll be back. It's in the bag. I wasn't sure it was in the bag at all, but the idea seemed worth trying, even if it was a long shot. And I had to make it sound a cinch to George, or he'd have gone ahead, now that he'd steeled himself to try. He said, But tell me. I pointed to the clock.
It's 1 minute of 8, and there isn't time to explain. Trust me, for an hour, okay?
He nodded and turned to go back into the shop, and I was off. I went to the library, and I went to the local bookstore, and I was back in half an hour. I rushed into the shop with 6 big books under each arm and yelled, Hey, George, rush job. I'll set it.
He was at the type bank at the moment, emptying the stick. I grabbed it out of his hand and sat down at the linotype and put the stick back under the vise. He said frantically, "Hey, get out of—" and grabbed my shoulder. I shook off his hand. "You offered me a job here, didn't you? Well, I'm taking it. Listen, George, go home and get some sleep. Or wait in the outer office. I'll call you when the job is over." Etaoin Shrdlu seemed to be making impatient noises down inside the motor housing, and I winked at George, with my head turned away from the machine, and shoved him away. He stood there looking at me irresolutely for a minute, and then said, "I hope you know what you're doing, Walter." So did I, but I didn't tell him that. I heard him walk into the outer office and sit down at his desk there to wait. Meanwhile, I'd opened one of the books I'd bought, torn out the first page, and put it on the clipboard of the machine. With a suddenness that made me jump, the mats started to fall, the elevator jerked up, and Etaoin Shrdlu spat out a slug into the stick, and another, and on. I sat there and sweated. A minute later, I turned the page, then tore out another one and put it on the clipboard. I replenished the metal pot. I emptied the stick, and on. We finished the first book before 10:30. When the 12 o'clock whistle blew, I saw George come in and stand in the doorway, expecting me to get up and come to lunch with him. But Etaoin was clicking on, and I shook my head at George and kept on feeding copy. If the machine had got so interested in what it was setting that it forgot its own manifesto about hours and didn't stop for lunch, that was swell by me. It meant that maybe my idea might work. 1 o'clock and going strong. We started the fourth of my dozen books. At 5 o'clock, we'd finished 6 of them, and were halfway through the 7th. The bank was hopelessly piled with type, and I began pushing it off on the floor or back into the hopper to make room for more. The 5 o'clock whistle, and we didn't stop. Again George looked in, his face hopeful but puzzled, and again I waved him back. My fingers ached from tearing sheets of copy out of the book, my arms ached from shoveling metal, my legs from walking to the bank and back, and other parts of me ached from sitting down. 8 o'clock, 9, 10 volumes completed, and only 2 more to go. But it was working. Etaoin Shrdlu was slowing down. It seemed to be setting type more thoughtfully, more deliberately. Several times it stopped for seconds at the end of a sentence or a paragraph. Then slower, slower. And at 10 o'clock it stopped completely and sat there, with only a faint hum coming from the motor housing, and that died down until one could hardly hear it. I stood up, scarcely daring to breathe until I'd made certain. My legs trembled as I walked over to the tool bench and picked up a screwdriver. I crossed over and stood in front of Etaoin Shrdlu, and slowly, keeping my muscles tensed to jump back if anything happened, I reached forward and took a screw out of the second elevator. Nothing happened, and I took a deep breath and disassembled the vice jaws. Then, with triumph in my voice, I called out, "George!" and he came running. "Get a screwdriver and a wrench," I told him. "We're going to take it apart, and, well, there's that big hole in the yard. We'll put it in there and fill up the hole. Tomorrow you'll have to get yourself a new linotype, but I guess you can afford that." He looked at the couple of parts on the floor that I'd already taken off, and he said, "Thank God," and went to the workbench for tools. I walked over with him, and I suddenly discovered that I was so dog-tired I'd have to rest a minute first, and I sank down into the chair, and George came over and stood by me. He said, "And now, Walter, how did you do it?" There was awe and respect in his voice. I grinned at him. "That pimple business gave me an idea, George. The pimple of Buddha. That and the fact that the linotype reacted in a big way to what it learned. See, George, it was a virgin mind, except for what we fed it. It set books on labor relations, and it goes on strike. It sets love pulp mags, and it wants another linotype put in. So I fed it Buddhism, George. I got every damn book on Buddhism in the library and the bookstore." "Buddhism? Walter, what on earth has—" I stood up and pointed at Etaoin Shrdlu. "See, George, it believes what it sets, so I fed it a religion that convinced it of the utter futility of all effort and action, and the desirability of nothingness. Om mani padme hum, George. Look, it doesn't care what happens to it, and it doesn't even know we're here. It's achieved nirvana, and it's sitting there contemplating its chem stud."